All right, so meet the 18 people charged with the charged along with Donald Trump in the 19-person indictment out of the state of Georgia, out of Fani Willis. First off, we have Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows did not show up essentially as an unindicted co-conspirator in Jack Smith's list of people in the federal indictment, which caused a lot of us to speculate that he had flipped on Trump. If he did, he apparently flipped to Jack Smith, but not to Fani Willis. But now he's facing a minimum mandatory 5 years in prison for his participation in this scheme, in this racketeering and influenced criminal organization scheme, this RICO scheme. I'm guessing he's going to change his tune fairly quickly. That was number one. Number two is John Eastman. John Eastman is basically the architect of the entire legal strategy that had to do with the fake electors. Now, I have to tell you, in March of 2020, now this was before, this was what, 7-8 months before the election, the 2020 election. I wrote an op-ed that was published in Alternate, and it was titled something like, "We better get ready if Donald Trump refuses to leave office." And in that article, I went through the 1876 Tilden versus Hayes election. It was a 76 or 72, I forget which. I think it was 76. I went through that election where a number of states, I believe it was 4, it was Oregon and 3 southern states, submitted dual slates of electors. Oregon was occupied at that time by the Ku Klux Klan. Our political system in the 1870s was run by the Klan here in Oregon. And in the 3 southern states, while the Klan was very powerful and very active, those states were actively, in 1876, under occupation by the Union Army. And so these 4 states, when Sam Tilden, as a Democrat, and Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, ran against each other for president, it turned out that Tilden actually got more votes. He won the popular vote, and he won the Electoral College vote, but he never became president. And I pointed this out in this article in March of 2020, before Cheeseborough had come up with his plan, before Mark Meadows was and John Eastman were putting this thing into play. Now, I'm not saying that they got the idea from me, because I got the idea just from history. This is not a secret history. I mean, I wrote about it in my book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, back, in 2020, well, I'd have to go back and look what year that book was published, but several years ago. And the way it worked out was that you had these 4 states that submitted dueling slates of electors. The vice president was unable or unwilling to pick one or the other, and so it got thrown to the states, which is what the Constitution provides for, which is what John Eastman and Cheeseborough were trying to do. Eastman was trying to get this thrown to Congress, where each state has 1 vote. And there are more states in the United States controlled by Republicans than by Democrats. It's fewer people, but more states. And so had this election gotten thrown to the House of Representatives like it was in 1876, Donald Trump would have been made president. Just like in 1876, even though Samuel Tilden won both the popular vote and the Electoral College vote, Congress made Rutherford B. Hayes the president. And it was part of a deal. The deal that they cut in 1876 was that the Congress, the Republicans, would go along with ending Reconstruction and basically re-embracing Jim Crow, or embracing Jim Crow. This was the origins of Jim Crow, in exchange for the Democrats going along with a Republican becoming president. That was the deal. So, you know, back in March of 2020, I was saying this is a scenario the Republicans might try to play out, and it's exactly what they did. So anyhow, John Eastman was in the middle of all that. So number 3, Kenneth Chesebro, spelled Chesebro, like Chesbro, but apparently he's from Wisconsin and likes cheese. I don't know, but he calls himself Chesebro. He was the main coordinator and wrote the original memo on the fake electors plot. Then there's Rudy Giuliani. Giuliani, of course, was Trump's personal attorney. He was a longtime buddy. He's facing 6 charges in connection with this scheme. The indictment states that 3 Georgia state legislature committee hearings. There were 3 committee hearings where Giuliani testified and lied, promoted false stories about election fraud. And he is charged with 1 count of soliciting lawmakers to violate their oaths of office for each one of those 3 meetings when he came in and told election lies to the Georgia legislature in open legislature. Next up is Jenna Ellis. By the way, let me just say for the record, in my opinion, I think it's extremely likely that Eastman is going to flip, that Chesebro is going to flip, that Meadows has already flipped federally and is going to flip on this state charge. In fact, I'm of the opinion that there's not a single one of these people who is willing to go to hell, essentially, to go to 5 years in a Georgia prison. And there is, I mean, you know, hell is probably better than that. I don't think there's a single person in this entire indictment who's willing to do that on behalf of Donald Trump. Especially as the probability of Donald Trump ever again becoming president fades rapidly, and it is rapidly fading. So, next up, Jenna Ellis. Jenna Ellis is also charged, beyond the main racketeering charge for which she's facing 5 years in prison, minimum mandatory. She's also charged with soliciting a public officer to violate their oath. This has to do with the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee hearing in Georgia on January 3rd. So in other words, she was there with Giuliani lying to the state about that. Ray Smith is a Georgia lawyer who was a member of Trump's legal team. He played a fairly extensive role in interacting with Georgia lawmakers. He is facing 3 counts of soliciting a public officer to violate their oath and 2 counts of making false statements. He also faces 6 counts with regard to the scheme to submit a false slate of electors, and he's been charged with forgery, making false statements, he's been charged with that twice, and multiple conspiracy counts. Again, I don't see Ray Smith going to prison on behalf of Donald Trump. Do you? I mean, do you think any of these people would go to prison for Donald Trump? And then there's Jeffrey Clark. Jeffrey Clark was the guy that Donald Trump was going to make, and in fact did make for about 48 hours, the Attorney General of the United States. And he did that so that Jeffrey Clark, over the Attorney General's letterhead, could launch an investigation into voter fraud in these 5 or 6 states and freeze the election results based on an ongoing investigation by the Department of Justice. He's been charged under the RICO Act. He's been, so he's facing a minimum mandatory 5 years. He's also facing additional charges for a criminal attempt to commit false statements and writings. Then we get to the names of people you've probably never heard of. Robert Cheeley, he's an attorney. He's facing 10 charges plus a single charge of perjury. He's accused of, quote, knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making at least 1 false statement to the Fulton County Special Purpose Grand Jury. In other words, Robert Cheeley is being charged with lying to the grand jury on behalf of Trump, presumably. Then there's Michael Roman. He was the director of Election Day operations for Trump's 2020 re-election campaign, and he faces 7 charges with regard to the fake elector scheme. He's apparently based in Pennsylvania, I'm not sure. Then there's Stephen Lee. Stephen Lee is charged with influencing witnesses by traveling to the home of Ruby Freeman on December 14th and December 15th and trying to influence her testimony. Now, he is a white lawyer who went to meet with Ruby Freeman and basically threatened her. Said, you could go to jail if you don't tell the truth about the role that you played in this election fraud. Now, he figured out that she didn't trust him, or he concluded that she didn't trust him because he was a white man. And so he reached out to Harrison Floyd, who is the leader of Black Voices for Trump. And one of the charges against Freeman is that he brought in Floyd, number one. And where did I go with that? Yeah, okay. And here's Harrison Floyd. He was, as I said, he's charged with racketeering, influencing witnesses, and conspiracy to slit false statements. There's Trevian Cuddy. He's a former publicist for the rapper Ye. He was the one who first contacted Ruby Freeman. He's charged with conspiracy and to commit solicitation of false statements and writings. All 16 of the fake electors met in the state capitol on December 14th and forged documents. Only 3 of them have been charged, which means that 13 of the Georgia fake electors have flipped. Sean Still is another person. He's a Georgia Republican Party official who signed the Electoral College documents. He's been charged with, he's also the Republican Party in Georgia's finance chairman, and he's a sitting state senator. He's been charged with 7 counts, including impersonating a public officer, forgery, false statements, and attempting to false statements. And then there's David Schaefer. He's the chairman of the Georgia Republican Party. It's getting close to the bone here for the false electors. And then Sidney Powell, whose name you probably recognize. This has to do with the Coffee County breach. Kathy Latham, who was the chairwoman of the Coffee County Republican Party. Misty Hampton, who was the Coffee County election supervisor. And Scott Hall, who runs a bail bond business. They're all facing charges having to do with breaking open these voting machines in Coffee County. So those are the people who have been charged in this indictment. Unless I'm missing something, I don't see where any of these people have any good reason to go to prison for 5 years to protect Donald Trump, which is why I think Fani Willis said, yeah, we're going to charge them all at the same time and see them in court.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Because she knows that the vast majority of them are going to flip.